replace her, and I thought I would invite you to come on the journey with me and see how I make one. Let's go! Thank you to Tiffinie at Hobble Creek Pottery for teaching me how to do this, but she's had a tumble. So this is about 5 pounds of standard 240. I need about 2.5, so I'm going to cut it down and then we'll go over the slab roller and we'll roll out a slab. Okay, so when we make a slab, the clay has memory, so we have to make sure that we get this to where the clay particles all align so it doesn't crack. So I'm going to make a whole bunch of noise while I slam this out before I roll it out. Loud noise! As I do this, I pull it to myself so that I stretch out the clay. So it just makes a whole bunch of noise, but it makes it work better. I also rotate how I'm doing it, so I'll do it this way one way and then this way the other way. Okay. I'm going to start rolling this about 3/4 of an inch for the first time through. And then I'll take it and I'll rotate it. Go down to about 1/2 inch. And if you don't have a slab roller, you can do this with a rolling pin and with some guides. But I was lucky enough to get a slab roller for Christmas, so I get the slab roller. I'm going to go down to about 3/8 of an inch and stop with that. A lot of hand building projects you can do 1/4 of an inch, but for this one we need it to be a little bit thicker for the stability. When you pick up your slab, just make sure that you don't warp it any more than you have to. The easiest way to do this is just kind of lift it up and keep it flat. And we're moving to my hand building table. I need to keep it flat, just like that. The next step is to, again, align those particles. Now, I've heard some people say that you don't have to do this, but I've also heard people say that you really do need to do this. So I decided to err on the side of caution, and I will take just a red Cheryl Mud Tools rib and compress the clay. This also helps to get the canvas texture out of it, but we're going to compress the clay one way on one side, and then again carefully flipping it over and compress it on the other side. Okay, cut. So the size of the witch that you want to make depends on a lot of different things. It depends on the size of the cone that you're going to use. There are so many different cone shapes and sizes that you could come up with. This is just a bisque fired cone. It's covered in newspaper. That is extremely important. If you don't cover anything in newspaper or plastic wrap, your clay will stick to it and you will lose your piece. Trust me on that one. But this is just a paper cone that I made. Here's another size of a bisque cone. It's taller. These also make great Christmas trees. They make great angels. They make great gnomes. You know, whatever you want to do. This one is actually, believe it or not, a trombone mute. So you can find things around the house. I don't know if you have a trombone mute around your house, but we do. So this one was actually part of a witch's hat from Michael's or Hobby Lobby. I can't remember where I got it. But you've got all kind of different size cones, and that's going to depend on, or the size of your witch will depend on what size cone you use. I don't know which one I'm going to use, so let's figure that out. Okay, because of the size of the slab that I have, that I've rolled out, I decided to go with this cone and this template. Now, how I keep this organized for myself is I've written cone 1 on here, and I've written cone 1 on here so that I know that these two go together. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to lay down my cone 1 template. This is just made out of craft foam. So I'll lay it down and then I'll use my X-Acto knife. You can use a needle tool if you want. You can use a fettling knife if you want. It is completely and totally up to you what you cut this out with. But that's what I'm going to do right now, is cut this out. Okay, so now again, being careful not to really move that slab too much, I'm just going to separate it out. I'm going to use this for something a little bit later, the rest of the witch. So I'm going to move this out of the way. And I'm going to take my slab. Now, there are two ways that you can do this. If you wanted to add texture to this, you could do it before you cut it out and keep the shape this way, or you can do it after you cut it out and just make sure that you don't smush it too much. So I'm going to do that now. This is cornstarch that's in just a sock. So I'm going to kind of tamp this down, and this helps the texture roller not stick in the clay. If you don't have some kind of a release agent, it will stick, and that would be a really bad thing. So, hi guys. So yesterday I was doing some video on how to make a witch, and I noticed after reviewing some of the footage that I did some things that were pretty bad. So I'm going to try and go back today and correct those. So if you see me switching back and forth between what I had on yesterday and what I have on today, and if you see kind of a design difference between the witch that I'm going to make today and the one I made yesterday, that's why. I needed to go back and correct some of the issues that I had with what I had done. Just learning all this, so please be patient with me and hang in there, and please like and subscribe if you like being with us on this Wearhouse Creations journey. Thanks. Let's get started again. My texture roller is what I use for a lot of Halloween things. It's got the skull with almost a damask pattern to it. It came from, I don't remember where it came from, but I will link it in the description below so that you can get one if you would like one too. Okay, because my slab is actually longer than my my texture roller, I want to concentrate on the bottom part of the dress. This will be up in the neck of the dress, and the hair will cover most of this, so it doesn't matter if it doesn't go that far. So I'm going to start off of my piece. Okay, so I missed a couple of places in there, but that's okay because the glaze will still catch most of that texture. And it does not have to be perfect. Look at me. In my work, it's very intentional that I don't do everything perfect because I constantly have to remind myself that I do not have to be perfect every minute of the day. So my work is perfectly imperfect on purpose. I do that on purpose. This time, instead of cutting out my template before I put the texture in, I'm going to put the texture in first so that I get less warpage. I don't even know if that's a word, but I don't want my shape to warp as much as it did with the last witch. So I'm going to do my texture first, and then I'm going to cut out my pattern. So I made the cape with a little bat template. This one I'm going to do a little bit differently. I'm going to make this one a little more like her, with the flowing cape like this. All this is basically a triangle. Now this one has a little flip up in the back. I'm not going to do that because I didn't have enough clay. So basically all you do when you're making these witches is you have to, as Tiffinie at Hobble Creek Pottery says, you're building clothes. So I'm basically gonna build a cape for my witch. Now this one is a little bit raggedy because I like this texture. So this I'm gonna actually kind of ragged out the edges. Now you still have to be very mindful about sharp edges that you create, so I'll have to go back around this and make sure that it's not too sharp. One thing that I'm going to do on the edges here that I did not do on the other witch, I'm going to use my piece of, this is just a piece of cotton material, and I'm going to use this to soften the sides and the edges so that they're not quite as thick and chunky. Because the edges of a cape, we don't want them to be thick and chunky. Now I'm going to put a little bit of texture on this in a minute, but I haven't decided what I'm going to use yet. Okay, I'm going to try something. This is just a little ball of clay that I have carved a pattern into that I use as a texture roller. I'm going to try to put this on both sides of the cape. Now this is, you'll see both sides of this because it'll go like on this one, you'll see the back side and you'll see these insides. So I'm going to try to put this texture on both sides of here, and we'll see how that works. that's the outside of the cape, that's the inside of the cape. So it'll go like that. Okay, I think I know what I want to do. These are stamps that I've made. There are so many videos on how to make these. I just carved them out of clay, and then they're just bisqued so that I can use them. The thing, again, that I like about using something like this, as with the hot glue that I used on her cape yesterday, nobody else has these. Nobody else has this exact pattern because I carved these. Even if they use the same thing, it's not the same pattern. So I think I'm going to use that. This is what it looks like. I used it in a combination with a leaf stamp that I had, but this is what they look like. So I think I'm going to try that without the leaves. Let's see how this works. I'm going to put one right there. And this is just in a random pattern. Putting them in there, see what they're going to look like. Alright, so remember I said we've got to cover our whatever cone that we use in plastic wrap or newspaper. I just have plastic wrap. I think this came from Aldi. And so we're just going to cover it with plastic wrap. And then we're going to take our form or our piece of clay and we're going to wrap the cone. Now because we put the texture on after it was cut out, it's warped a little bit, but we can always fix that. It's not a big deal. So just like any other hand building project, when you have something like this, you're going to want, well, depending on how set up your clay is, you're probably going to want to score and slip this. So I'm going to do that now. Because I didn't like the way that it turned out the last time, I'm going to do something a little bit different. Before, I just butted up my edges together, but this time I'm going to use this tool to make a 45-degree bevel. To make my seam just look a little bit better than it did. I didn't like that. I'm going pretty deep with this. This is it's just a scoring tool. But anyway, so any scoring tool will do. You can actually even use a fork if you don't have a scoring tool. But I'm going to score it. And then once I finish scoring deeply, you get that crosshatch pattern going. I'm going to get some slip. Now I've got white slip here in just a ketchup bottle. It's important that you try to make sure that your slip and your clay body are the same so that they have the same shrinkage rate and they don't dislike each other. And once it's scored and slipped, you go ahead and just put it together. Just smush it all up there. Yep, you're going to cover up some of your pattern, but that's okay. The reason that you want that form underneath it is so that you have something to push against. Now, the other thing that I could have done, if I had wanted to, I could have beveled these at a 45-degree angle and done it that way. Sometimes I do that, sometimes I don't. It just kind of depends on what I feel like doing at the time. Now, if you look at this seam, it looks really, really ugly right now. So you can choose either to put this in the back of your witch, or you can do something to give a little texture right there. Because I'm trying to do this pretty quickly, I'm going to help this seam close up by using an MKM roller. So I'm going to take it and I'm going to go rolling down the front of this. That also helps to hide the seam, and it will help stitch it together. Okay. Alright, notice that I'm all wonky down here now. When I said imperfect, this is way too imperfect. So we're going to need to change this up a little bit. So I'm just going to take my X-Acto knife and just cut off the part that is just way wrong. Just like that. And the rest of it can just kind of flare out a little bit. Now, We're going to add some movement to the cape that's going to go over this. So if it looks like this is a dress, that's kind of what we're going for. So that's good. Make the top of that a little flat because that is where the head is going to go. All right, a couple of things we've got to do. We've got to make the hat, which we'll use some of the flat part of the slab. And we're going to make a cape, and we're going to make the head. For the head, I'm just going to use some of the scraps from the original slab. You just take those and you smush them all together. And you just roll out a ball. Now, when you roll out this ball, you got to remember, see, this is too big. I don't want a head that's that big, so I'm going to take off some of this, and I'm going to roll it again. I can even, if I wanted to, if my clay's, we're in Georgia heat, so everything dries out pretty quickly. So I just dunk that in water, and I'm going to roll it into another ball and see how that looks. Now, you don't want a perfectly round head because nobody has a perfectly round head except for Charlie Brown, and that's not what we're going for. So let's see. That looks pretty good. She'll have a hat on and she'll have hair. So this will, and she'll also have a cape coming up here. So I think that's going to be pretty good. Now you can also decide how you wanted to do. Do you want her looking down like my ring witch over here? She's looking down. And I don't put any kind of face on my witches because I like them that way. I like them better without the features. So I think I'm going to have her looking down just a little bit. So again, we're going to score and slip. Score the bottom of her head here. You got to do this very well because otherwise she will lose her head. And I'm going to put some slip on that and stick her on there and just kind of wiggle around. I'll take my paintbrush and then just kind of clean up around the edges right here, and this will help keep her head on too and clean it up. And then there she is. And clean up her face too. Make it a little bit more smooth. Okay, and there she is. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to make is her hat. And what I've done is I've just got a ball of the same clay. This ball is actually probably too big for what I want to do, but we can always scale that down. This is called, I believe it's called a pizzle. I think it's probably for some kind of Danish cookie. I'm not sure. But as I said before, the person who taught me to do this was Tiffinie at Hobble Creek Pottery, and this is what she said to get, so this is what I got. And it has been wonderful for making witches. So you just take the ball of clay, and you take the pizzle. It's just like your thumb, you're going to do a pinch pot. We're just going to push it up in there to make that hole and start that hole. And then we'll start pinching down, and just pinch, and pinch, and pinch, and pinch to get the point. Pinch some more, pinch some more, pinch some more. Then you can take it out of the pizzle and then go ahead and start your classic pinch pot. And you just pinch and turn the way you go around. Pinch and turn. Pinch and turn. And you just keep going around until your hat is the size that you want it. As I said, this is way too much clay, so I am going to cut it where I think it might need to be cut. Look at that. That is way too much clay. So we're going to throw that over there. And then continue just with what we have left to pinch and turn. Now there are many, many different ways that you can make hats. This is just the easiest one for me right now. So we're going to pinch and turn, pinch and turn, pinch and turn until it gets a little bigger. And I'm sticking my finger up in here and trying to make it hollow because we want this to dry. As I said, in Georgia heat it's going to dry pretty quickly, but for you, it may have to take a little bit longer. But I want it to be thin enough that it looks like a hat, but not thin enough that it's going to crack. And I want my witch to have more of an organic looking hat. I like the more raggedy, what's the word? Used hat. Kind of like the sorting hat in Harry Potter, you know. That's what I'm going for. So here's my hat. I'll clean this up a little bit more when it is a little bit harder. It's easier to deal with at that point. But the next step is to try and figure out what I want on my hat. Also, oh, the top. You can do a whole bunch of different things. Look back over her. Hers, she's got the little jaunty curl to hers. I don't know if I want to do that again. She also has just a regular black band around hers. I've done some that have flowers, birds, spiders. It just kind of depends on what you want. So for this one, it's like you're pulling a handle. You just wet your fingers and you start pulling that tip. It's very gentle pressure and you're only using your fingertips. You're not pulling with your whole hand like you would when you pull a handle. But you need to make sure that it's wet enough that it's pulling, but not too wet that it'll fall apart. So there's that happy balance in there. And I'm going to give this one just a little curl. I don't know if you can see that. You see that? Little curl. Maybe go over a little bit. Like that. Alright. And the other thing I'm going to do, you could put a band around the hat like I did with hers. That band, you can do that. I think I'm just going to go with a flower looking thing. Maybe a snail, maybe a flower. I'm just going to cut a little piece right here. I'm going to make a coil from this. A very thin coil. And then I'm just going to roll it up. And again, thank you, Georgia Dry Heat. It's cracking a little bit, but I can still fix that. Alright, so there's one little flower. I'll do another one. And one more. I'm going to dip that in water because it is way, way dry. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, so you see the little cracks that are in this? I can just take my paintbrush. I don't know if you can see that or not, but they were cracked because it was a little dry. So just take my paintbrush and take my finger and just kind of get those cracks out, just like you would do in any other project. And again, the glaze is going to cover up some of this, so you can be a little bit more, you don't have to be so perfect. Again, notice there's a theme in my work. It is not perfect. So, I want this little curlicue to be going to the right of her head, I think. If I look at it this way, which way do I like it better? I think I like it to the right. So I think I'm going to put the little flowers on this side, just because, I don't know, I just feel like it. So I'm going to score some of this up a little bit. Now this clay now is pretty wet, but I'm not going to score it. So I'm going to just take my little flowers and I'm going to smush one there, smush one there, and smush one there, so that we have three little flowery shapes. And I'm going to take my paintbrush with some water and just kind of stick them on there. So there's the hat. And I can go back if I need to once I've put it on, you know, check it on her head. I can cut some of this brim off, which it looks like I probably will need to. But I'm going to set this aside and let it firm up a little bit. You can use just a regular comb to make a cape that goes over her if you want. That's what I used for this one. It was just a smaller triangle than the first one, or a smaller cone than the first one. So that is a possibility, but I'm going to do something a little bit different with this one. I have 3 bats that I can use actually as templates, but I don't think that one's going to fit. Let's see what happens once we put some texture on here. So again, I've got my pouncy thing to make sure that my roller doesn't stick. Actually, I'm not even going to use a roller this time. What I'm using, believe it or not, this is hot glue. I just made a squiggly design of hot glue, and I'm going to put it down here, and I'm going to use a pony roller to smush it down into the clay. Smush it out a little bit more. I'm kind of cheating because I know I need a little bit more clay, so I'm pushing down a little bit harder than I normally would. But I need more clay, so I'm cheating. And then to get it out, we just reach down in here and pull it out. And since it's hot glue, you can bend it however you want to, and if I break it, that's okay. I can do something else. Now that's a really deep pattern, so I'm going to use my sponge and kind of just go over it just a little bit because it is a little deep and a little rough on the edges. So I'm going to take care of that just a little bit. Alright, let's see what we got here. Dang it. Still, oh, wait a minute. I can make that work. Now that my pattern's going to be off a little bit, but that might actually be kind of interesting. In fact, what I can do is add some more here. See, it doesn't matter whatever kind of plan you come up with, or at least for me, I can come up with a plan and by the time I'm finished it will have changed about 5 times because well, poster child for ADD, I think that's my excuse. So I'm going to take my little pattern here and I'm going to, I don't need the ears, so I'm going to do this and I'm going to cut this out. I've also been asked to teach a class on these, and so making this video is really going to help me try and figure out what in the world to do with a bunch of adults who want to learn how to make witches. Alright, so here's my cape. Again, with a slab, just be really careful how you pick it up. Try not to stretch it any more than you need to. There's my bat, or my cape. I don't need the bat ears, so I'm going to cut them off. So goodbye bat ears. And now we have a cape. I want something else right there. So I'm going to do this one more time. There. It's interesting. The reason that I like using things like this is that these are unique and nobody else will have one of these. And that way she's mine. She's my witch and nobody will have one like her. So, carefully, now ideally let all of this set up a little bit because she's really fragile and my clay is still very soft. But I have her here and I'm going to place the cape around her shoulders. Well, I need to be able to see this, so we'll push her towards me and make the cape come around her shoulders and then overlap like that. Ooh. Now again, there are a few ways that you can do this. I'm going to score and slip just the back so that I know she's attached, or the cape is attached. Score and slip. Almost out of slip. There we go. Paintbrush. Again. Take her and put her cape on just like that. I'm going to overlap here, and because I am overlapping here, I'm also going to score and slip here. I'm going to score both sides. And press. I'm using just a wooden tool to reach back up in here and push. Now, while I'm doing this, I'm going to go and just squish, I'm sure there's a better term for that, pinch the sides and kind of give this cape a little bit of movement. I'm going to let it flip out a little bit. Especially, oh, and if you start to see these cracks, that's okay. You could just use your finger and smooth them back out a little bit. But again, pinching to make the sides not quite as sharp. You could also use a cloth on the edges of these. Normally that's what I do, but to be honest, I forgot. But I'm going to give this a little jaunt here. You got to be really careful when you're using clay to not have sharp edges, because once you have bisked and glaze fired your clay, these edges can be extremely sharp and will cut the mess out of your fingers if you're not careful. And that's not something that we want. So I'm smoothing out the cracks. Now again, the glaze is going to cover a lot of this. So she has her cape. She has some movement in her cape. I am going to give her some buttons right there. So I'm going to get a scrap piece of clay over here. And let's see, I have just some of the stamps that I have to use, and I love texture. I'm addicted to texture. Bill laughs at me all the time because I love texture so much. I think I have a star. I think I'll use a star and give her a little star medallion here. So here's the star. We'll cut out the circle, score it here, score it here, get a little bit of slip on it. Boop, boop, boop. And put the star there. Again, use my wooden tool so that I can push a little bit on that. Also use my paintbrush and some water, clean that up a little bit. Clean up the edges of the cape. Now you can, once this is a little bit harder, you can also do some more work on it to clean it up. But I think that's kind of cool. I'm not going to put the hat on right now because I'm afraid it's still a little bit too wet. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make her hair. Again, there are so many different ways that you can make hair. If you look at this one, I call this my ring witch because she has this long, stringy hair. I kind of like that. You can also use a garlic press to make really stringy hair, or you know, curly little pieces of hair. But y'all, oh my gosh, that breaks off so easily. You can also make a heart and have just different pieces of hair hanging down, but I think I'm going to use this kind of like the ring hair. And all I'm doing here is just cutting some strong or long stringy pieces, differing sizes, and then we'll pull this out here, and we have some hair. I'm smushing the edges, or smushing it down a little bit. What I want to do with this now is I want to give it some texture. So I'm just using my scoring tool and giving it some texture. And I'm going to smush the top and pinch it really small or really thin so that I can attach it to my head and not have it completely fall apart. I'm going to cut this one to have a little bit more movement in the hair. The thing you have to be careful with is when you're putting this together is that her head doesn't fall off. Now remember that we're going to have a hat up here, so you don't have to like obsess over making this do exactly like you want it to, or you know what it would look like without the hat. Just remember you have to glaze this, so it's going to be very difficult if you put it all the way down onto the cape. When you start to glaze, it's going to be very difficult to get in there and get the color of the hair and the color of the cape separated. I usually, when this is still greenware, I will use an underglaze and kind of get the hair and the face done first. Not always though, but you can. It's just, it makes it easier in the long run. Whoops. Alright, so I'm going to pull this up. But remember, these pieces of hair, if you leave them sticking up like that, that will break off in a heartbeat. So I want it to have some movement, but I also don't want it to break off. So I'm just kind of giving it some body like that. So there she is, and that'll be absolutely terrifying. Alright, last thing that we're going to do is add her hat. Again, I said when you made the hat you can cut it if you wanted to, and I'm going to cut mine down a little bit because it's just too big for me. The brim, I don't like that. I am going to thin it out some because it's awfully heavy. So I'm going to thin it out some, and I can keep cutting that brim down. I just want to make sure that it's thin enough that it's not going to cause issues when I put it on her head. I'll take my sponge and wet the edges to make them a little less sharp. So between my sponge and my finger, we're having a good brim of this hat. And I'm going to put it at a little angle like that to make it a little jaunty. I'm not making her as scary as my ring witch, but I'll put her there. And again, we slip and score. Swoosh. And holding her head. Make sure it gets down on there. Just like that. There's my witch. And I'll show you what she looks like once she's glazed. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. Thanks.